Hey guys, everything I'm recounting in the story here is 100% true. I'm not going to try to persuade everyone for certain that this is a skinwalker or anything, but this crept everyone involved in the story out, including me, a pretty big skeptic when it comes to this sort of thing. I posted this here because I have no idea where else I could turn to. I'd also like to apologize for the length of the story in advance, as there's a lot that needs to be mentioned to set the scene. Here it goes. It all starts when a couple of friends, who I will refer to as Q, R, and S, and I wanted to have a guy's vacation and go camping somewhere back in May 2021. As a little backstory, Q was my best friend, and S was R's younger brother. We chose a spot that we had been to once before, but when we got there, we decided to drive out another 3-ish miles away from the previous destination. The area wasn't extremely in the middle of nowhere, as some of you might think. There was a dirt road wide enough for a decent sized truck to go up and down the road with ease. Once we decided on a place to camp, we realized that not a soul was in the general area for probably another mile. The only evidence that there was anyone near us was the distant sound of gunshots, as shooting was allowed in the area at the time. The only things alive in the area that we could see, larger than a bird, were the grazing cattle occasioned by a fence. One of the main activities we would be participating in was trapping coyotes. For those of you who don't know, coyotes don't require a tag to kill, and you can hunt as many as you want, as they are extremely quick to reproduce. We set up traps about 500 yards away from our campsite in a valley that a creek was running through. We could tell that this was a bottleneck for the coyotes to travel through, as many game trails were coming down to this choke point, and we were certain at least one coyote would come through. We set up the traps and then headed back to our campsite. We got back, and the sun is beginning to set. Being the middle of May, the sun was out in full force where we were at, approaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We were already exhausted from hauling around heavy trapping gear, but this heat just was making it worse. It got to the point where the only thing we could do was sit in what little shade we had and wait for a couple hours until the sun was down. A few hours later, the sun finally sets and the temperature begins to drop. We search around with our flashlights to find any dry sticks and dead sagebrush on the ground, all with the cows mooing in the background. Once we got our fire lit, we sit around and are laughing, reminiscing on old times and just being happy to be around each other. A few minutes go by and we were all just sitting around the campfire in silence when we hear a strange, high-pitched whine. I remember asking S and R what that sound was, and R tells me it was probably a coyote or something. The sound keeps persisting, and whatever was making it was getting close to the campfire. Every 10 or so seconds, the creature would call out. We went from laughing at it to just being confused the more we heard it and the closer it got. Then when we hear the thing call once again, probably about 40 feet or so in front of me, it's silent for only about 5 seconds this time. And not even kidding, we heard the same call, but this time from only like 20 feet behind me. This might not sound scary to a lot of you, but at this moment, it was chilling. We all scrambled up and we were feeling paranoid, so R assembles his .22 that he brought with us. Then, out of nowhere, the creature is back to where it once was, about 40 or so feet in front of me again. We're all so spooked and confused on how this is even happening. While Q, R, and S are talking, I pull out my phone and tell them to shut up and try to record the sound that this thing was making. Take a listen. Also, enjoys Q's pathetic impersonation of the creature he did before it called to lighten the mood. We all decide to try to follow that noise and see if we can find anything. It seemed to be leading us somewhere, but we weren't sure. As we followed, the thing was keeping a good distance between us, no less than 40 feet at the time. We crossed the cow fence, which was quite the task because it was coated in barbed wire. It's a bit strange too because that creature crossed through it without any sound. It kept pointing us in a direction that was leading to another creek, but as soon as we got there, we heard it from about 50 feet up a hill, which no animal could have done in that short amount of time without making any noise. We got shaken up by the whole thing, so we just went back to our tent. As soon as we got up though, Q pulled me aside and mentioned that he thought he saw something duck down when he shined his light at that hill the creature was leading us to. Throughout the night, we kept hearing that thing circle our tent, making those whining noises the entire time. We ended up spending another night there with the same things happening, but no harm came to us. The whole thing was just super unsettling. We didn't end up catching anything on that trip either. Now, before any of you ask, I'm going to clarify some things. This took place in southeastern Toole County, Utah. The place we stayed was near a small town called Vernon. We're almost certain it wasn't a cow. Cows are loud, clumsy animals. I mention this because none of us heard any movement, and even the baby cows can't move that high. At least, not from the ones we heard. Also, how could it have crossed that fence? They had also gone around the hill to a different side of the owner's property. We were completely sober during the entire campout. None of us have done drugs or drank. Maybe the heat exhaustion could have had a hand in it. We were able to find some coyote tracks, but we weren't sure if they were there before or after that night. Also, they were quite the distance from the campsite, and they seemed to be going in a completely opposite direction from where the creature was taking us, so we ruled that out. I didn't record the descent into the valley because I got caught up in the moment. I wasn't thinking about much other than trying to figure out what that creature was. Also, my phone was very close to dying. It was most likely a coyote. That's what we thought at first, but coyotes don't sound like that. They also usually travel in packs and are extremely loud. They sound more like high-pitched dog barks. There is a chance it was a bird. That's the theory that I am trying to tell myself. It's just strange though, because no other birds were out that night. We are fairly certain that it was just one creature, but the truth is we don't know for sure. But I am going to assume that there was just one because the sound never played at the same time from two different areas. Also, when we had heard it from directly behind me, it never came there again. Only straight in front of me, leading us to that creek and beyond. I am very skeptical that it would be some kind of skinwalker, but I honestly have no clue anymore. I did a little research on the area we stayed a few months after the whole ordeal. The area we were camping at was old Goshude territory before the Spaniards came to the valley back in the 1600s. I looked, and there are hardly any Goshude legends that I could piece to something like this. I've been trying to do some research, but I haven't found anything like this. Does anyone have any idea on what it could have been? A few months back, I was staying the night at one of my friend's house. He lives on the far edge of a town in Utah. He still had neighbors around, but there was a lot of forest around and it was next to a canyon. I don't know if the scenery helps to the story, but I will try to list every detail of my encounter. I was staying the night, and my girlfriend also came over to hang out for a while. We hang out, and everything is fine, and fun, and great. 1 a.m. rolls around, and I had work at 6 a.m. in another town about 30 minutes away. So I said, hey, maybe you should leave so I can get some sleep before work. And at this time, my friend went to sleep, and it was just me and her. As we were walking to her car, I started feeling uneasy, like I could hear something. We get to the driver's side of her car, and I give her a hug goodbye. As I am hugging my girlfriend, I look behind her, and I'm struck with shock and fear. Well, I see a creature, maybe 8 to 9 feet tall. It was standing next to a cherry tree on the side of my friend's driveway. It was bipedal. It was very skinny. The moon was out, so I could see the creature clearly, but not so much color details. The legs were bent backward like deer legs, or like the back moose legs. It slouched a lot, and I still couldn't see its face as it was in the leaves of the cherry tree, which was about 11 to 12 feet tall. I remember not being able to say much except goodbye to my girlfriend. I don't know why, but I couldn't tell her to look behind her before I let go of her, as I saw the creature move. It took off running towards the tree line. What absolutely baffled my mind was the speed of the creature. It looked impossible, as if blurry when it started running. I remember it looking right at me through the leaves, even though I couldn't see its face. What was the worst thing about the experience was the emotions attached to seeing what I saw. I felt like my confidence and emotions were attacked. I've never felt the feeling of fear like this before, and I have been charged by full-grown brown bears. After my girlfriend got into her car, I stood in that very spot from where I hugged her until she left the driveway. I don't know if it was more out of fear or making sure she left safely. I don't know what to do, so I slowly walked over to my car and got in it. I called my friend multiple times and he was asleep and didn't answer. I looked out my window after several minutes and I looked to the left and saw my friend's cat Avery. I tried to think logically. If my friend's cat, which probably has better senses than me, is out here, then I'm probably seeing things and it was safe. So I got out and stood next to Avery. Next thing I know, it sounds like there's a Clydesdale horse running through deep growth of the forest. Avery started running for the door, and I sprinted faster than Avery and got inside. For the next 3 hours, I sobbed and cried like I did when my dog died when I was 12. The fear I felt was indescribably powerful. I also remember it had long arms, and when it ran, it used all limbs. Please someone tell me if this is a real creature. It gives me goosebumps to this day, talking about it. And writing this brought me to tears. Just thinking about it is scary. I'll never forget the night of August 14th, 2021. I was fishing the river with my friend in a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. We loved coming to the public park to fish because it was quiet and there was a nice sandbar to fish from. This park had a Sioux burial mound about a half-mile from our spot. After fishing for a better part of the day, we decided to leave at dusk. In order to get back to our vehicles, we had to take a trail through the woods, which was about a 5-minute walk. I put on a clip light on the bill of my hat so we could see the trail. I remember when I first glanced ahead down the trail, I saw 2 circular white lights that I assumed were fireflies. Once we got further down the trail, we were closer to the area where I had seen the quote-unquote fireflies. It was then that I saw a pair of eyes that were either highly reflective from my light or glowing white. It wasn't long before I could make out a body. It was a very large, white body on 4 legs, bigger than a wolf but unnaturally skinny. I couldn't make out any facial features because his eyes were so bright. I wanted to warn my friend, but all I could manage to say was, "There's something there." We had no choice but to proceed because this was the only way back to our vehicles. This thing just stared us down but didn't make a single sound. My friend yelled at it to try and scare it away, but it didn't react at all. I yelled at it after she did, and it responded back, mimicking my voice. I honestly questioned myself and thought I was imagining things, so I yelled at it again, and it responded back at the same volume, same pitch, exactly like my voice. At this point, we realized this was not an animal. We both continued on the path in silence, but I maintained eye contact with the creature. I felt like this thing was ready to attack us at any moment, but it just stood there, staring. Eventually we were out of the woods and I could no longer see its eyes. We made it back to our vehicles and felt a sense of relief. I asked my friend, "Did you hear that talk back to me?" She said she did, and it sounded like my voice when it responded back to us. If she hadn't heard the voice, I would have assumed I imagined it. We went over what happened and our stories were the same except she said the creature had a wolf-like head. After our experience, my friend who is Myung went to see a shaman. The shaman believed it was an evil spirit and performed a cleansing on her. She was still shaken up by the experience for several weeks. I tried to hire a spiritual advisor online, but when I described the experience and asked for a spiritual cleansing of my own, it said they were not available at this time. At the advice of one of my friends, I burned some tobacco and said a prayer that the entity would leave me alone. It took me several months to just feel normal again, but I still think about it on a weekly basis. I tried to do further research and contacted the management at the park. They said the park we went to had an ancient Indian remains scattered along the river that were unmarked. They said there were some more Indian remains in the park than any other parks they managed. I contacted several Native American friends and was told the entity we encountered was a skinwalker. I know skinwalkers are part of the Navajo culture, but from what I read, it checks more of the boxes, more than any other supernatural being or cryptid. Thank you for reading my story. If anyone here has any insight on what this was, it would be greatly appreciated. My friend and I are still trying to process exactly what we saw the other day. We've talked it through countless times, trying to logically figure out how this was possible. Hopefully someone on here can give us some thoughts and ideas as to what actually happened. So I recently purchased a small bass boat, and my first mate, Ligov, and I have been super eager to explore the lake and its islands, as well as learn the fishing around it. We're new to Tennessee. Yesterday on the 4th of July, we decided to go fishing in this very secluded part of the lake we named No Man's Land, because of the low-hanging bridge that prevents boaters from entering the section. My boat can make it underneath because of how small it is, but I've never seen another boat in there. We decided to go deeper into the cove than we've ever been before. As we're slowly strolling down the lake, the path before us splits into 3 forks, and I ask which fork we should take. Ligov immediately says the middle one. So we continue straight as the water changes from large lake to a narrow river-like path. This is where a chain of events happened in quick succession, and we've talked it through after the fact to try and recall the order of how this went down. First, we heard a weird vocal-like noise coming from the woods beyond the shoreline, and we both tensed up and felt very uneasy. "What was that?" Ligov asked. "A dog," I said, as that was the first thing that came to mind. "I don't think that was a dog," Ligov answered immediately. Then we saw a bird high above us, perching on the branch, staring at us. "Maybe it was that bird," Ligov said. "Yeah, maybe," I answered. I'm not sure when it got into my hand, but at some point I drew my pistol and held it down at my side. Ligov held the fishing bow. We both had a very weird feeling as we drifted down the river, eyes glued to the bank. We came to a rotting pine tree that had fallen and was now half submerged in water, sitting on the shoreline. Then it happened. We heard a very loud, heavy-footed animal running through the woods, getting closer to the water. At first I thought it was a deer, as it was almost prancing, but as it got closer and louder, we both realized it was in fact not a deer. It was very large, jet black and canine. My brain thought, oh, it must be a coyote. But this was much bigger, like a huge German shepherd, and it was fast, like a black shadow, leaping through the trees and quickly approaching the bank that we were floating across from. It didn't seem to have any texture and details though, almost like it was flat and blurry. We couldn't see fur, or its face and eyes, just the outline of its body and tall wolf-like ears. But it was obviously the body of a canine. Adrenaline started rushing through us, and my brain raced thinking we were about to have to defend ourselves. It almost looked as if it was charging at us, but it was zigzagging and dodging through the trees toward the exact portion of the shoreline we were floating past. We were scared, but the 15 feet of water between our boat and the shoreline gave us some confidence. It would have to swim out to us, and I didn't see that as likely. It continued its leaping through the woods and quickly reached our portion of the shoreline. In one majestic, fluid motion, it leaped off of the shore and dove into the water right under the half-submerged pine tree in front of us. Stomp, 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 splash, and that was it. We held our breath as we waited to hear it swim or move toward us. Small ripples reached our boat from the splash. After the fact, Legov swears the splash should have been much bigger for a creature that size. "Watch for it to come back up," I whispered. I had never heard of canines being able to submerge themselves under the water, but here it was happening right in front of our eyes. We waited. Nothing. Silence. Just the subtle sound of the ripples it made, slowly dissipating. We waited about 20 more seconds and still nothing. It was almost as if the entire forest had shut off. Silence. Our eyes were glued to the fallen pine tree it dove under. "Maybe it's just standing in the water under the tree," Legov said. We get the courage to troll the boat a little closer to inspect the tree, but there's nothing. No sign of anything. At this point, we were in complete shock. Stunned. It's gone. How could it be gone? How does something that big just vanish, especially a huge creature like that? After 30 more seconds of silence, Legov breaks it with, "You saw what I saw, right?" A shiver flashes down my spine. "All of it," I reply. "Really though, what the hell was that?" Legov said. I replied, "I think we saw a demon." And we both nervously laughed. We stay floating near the shoreline in shock for at least another 10 minutes, hoping for a sign that we weren't crazy. Legov scoured the waters looking to see if it would come up for more air. It never did. How the hell could a big, black, wolf-like creature disappear into thin air, or water for that matter? Being skeptics, there has got to be a logical explanation for what we saw, but we just can't find one. If it had just splashed the water and gone out again, we would have seen it walk away in whatever direction, and two, we would have heard it, as anything putting weight on the leaves makes a loud noise. But it was just silence. The loudest of silences. We live in Middle Tennessee, if that helps at all. We're still a little shaken up by this. This is 100% true. We're not BSing you. Any insight would be much appreciated. A little detail first. I live in the Ozark Mountains. I have about 63 acres of land on a mountain, and I'm about 20 minutes from both towns near me. My house was originally a cabin built in the 1800s that someone had built onto. I don't have much more knowledge of the house because all of the paperwork burned in a courthouse fire. Weird stuff has always happened in and around the house, but those are stories for a different time. Last year, around February, I had a huge argument with my husband, and I decided to go hike up the mountain to cool off. My husband went to work on his Jeep, and my 5 dogs and I went up the mountain. Normally my dogs run around the trees, but they always kept me in their sights. This time they stuck very close to me. I noted it and just assumed it was because they knew how upset I was. We made it to the clearing and it just seemed so still up there. I felt a little uneasy, but ignored it and climbed up our deer stand. I sat up there for about 20 minutes, took some pictures, and I looked down to see my dogs at the base of the tree standing in different directions in alert stances. The feeling of dread washed over me. I scrambled down the deer stand and walked across the clearing with dogs in tow. I did not want to run because we have predators. All of a sudden, I could hear loud whistling. I stopped in my tracks. My dogs are now on high alert and all staring behind me to the left. My husband's voice came from that direction. He was screaming my name like something was wrong. I cannot describe the fear that came over me. I continued to walk down the mountain and walked over to my husband and asked him what was wrong. He looked at me confused and told me he had no idea what I was talking about. I kind of forgot about this moment until today. I woke up to loud whistling outside of my house around 4:40 to 5 a.m. It was the same whistle I used to call my dogs home. Parts of the whistle was wrong. All my dogs were inside, and my husband was still asleep. Part of me told myself to go check it out, but a voice in my head said to stay in bed. I listened to that voice,